History is filled with mysteries that refuse to disappear. Some are hidden beneath ruined cities, others behind missing documents, and a few exist because the people who knew the truth vanished without a trace. Centuries later, investigators, historians, and archaeologists are still piecing together fragments, hoping one forgotten clue might finally explain what really happened. Yet in many cases, every answer seems to uncover an even deeper question. This is the story of one of history's most unsettling enigmas, a mystery that began with the sudden appearance of a stranger and has never truly been solved. The mystery of Caspar Hauser. On the afternoon of May 26, 1828, the streets of Nuremberg, Germany followed their usual rhythm. Merchants opened their shops. Children wandered through narrow lanes, and travelers arrived through the city's gates carrying news from distant towns. Nothing about the day suggested it would become one of the most puzzling moments in 19th century European history. Then an unusual young man appeared. He looked to be around 16 or 17 years old. His clothes were worn but carefully arranged, almost as if someone had dressed him shortly before he entered the city. He moved awkwardly, struggling to maintain his balance with every step. Witnesses later described his walk as unnatural, as though he had spent little time standing or walking over long distances. What caught people's attention even more was his behavior. He seemed confused by nearly everything around him. Horses startled him, buildings fascinated him, crowds overwhelmed him. When spoken to, he responded with only a few repeated phrases. His vocabulary appeared remarkably limited, and despite looking old enough to work or travel alone, he seemed to understand almost nothing about ordinary life. In one hand, he carried a letter addressed to a cavalry captain serving in Nuremberg. That letter would become the first piece of an enormous puzzle. According to its contents, the young man had supposedly been raised in complete isolation by an unnamed caretaker who claimed to have sheltered him since infancy. The writer stated that the boy had never left his small room and knew almost nothing about the outside world. Whether the letter told the truth, or was itself part of an elaborate deception, remains uncertain even today. When authorities questioned the newcomer, they discovered he could barely explain who he was. The only name he consistently offered was Caspar Hauser. It was an answer, but hardly an explanation. Officials initially suspected an abandoned child, someone with developmental challenges, or perhaps even a traveler suffering from illness. Yet none of these possibilities comfortably matched what they observed. Caspar displayed strange contradictions. He seemed unable to perform many ordinary tasks that children usually master early in life. At the same time, he possessed certain abilities that suggested careful instruction. He could write his name. He recognized a few basic concepts. Some observers believed he had received selective education while remaining isolated from society. How could someone know so little about the world while still demonstrating signs of deliberate teaching? The contradiction fascinated everyone who met him. As physicians and scholars examined Caspar, they documented behaviors unlike anything they expected. Bright sunlight bothered his eyes. Loud sounds appeared unusually intense. He claimed to distinguish subtle smells that others barely noticed. Simple food sometimes upset him, while plain bread and water seemed most familiar. These observations encouraged the growing belief that he might truly have lived apart from ordinary society for many years. If so, where and why? No convincing location immediately emerged. Europe in the early 19th century contained countless villages, estates, monasteries, and isolated properties, yet no family stepped forward claiming to recognize him. No missing person report matched his description. No community admitted raising a child under such unusual conditions. The silence deepened the mystery. As news spread across Germany, Caspar quickly became a public fascination. People traveled simply to see him. Newspapers published articles describing his appearance and behavior. Intellectuals debated whether his story revealed hidden truths about human development, education, or even political intrigue. The mystery had escaped the streets of Nuremberg and entered the imagination of an entire continent. Among the many theories that emerged, one stood above the rest. Some believed Caspar was not an ordinary abandoned child at all. Instead, they suggested he belonged to European nobility. The idea may sound extraordinary, but several historical circumstances gave it surprising momentum. Royal families throughout Europe depended heavily on clear lines of succession. Births, marriages, and inheritances shaped political alliances, and determined who would eventually rule entire regions. If an infant stood between another claimant and power, that child could become the center of enormous political tension. Rumors began circulating that Caspar might secretly belong to the noble house of Baden. According to this theory, an aristocratic infant had been removed from public view and replaced with another child, allowing different heirs to inherit titles and influence. Supporters pointed to Caspar's estimated age, certain physical features, and the unusual secrecy surrounding his origins. Yet despite decades of discussion, no definitive evidence ever confirmed the claim. No surviving document established his royal identity. No uncontested witness stepped forward with first-hand knowledge. Historians continue to debate whether the theory reflects genuine historical possibility or simply the natural tendency to build dramatic explanations around unexplained events. Regardless of whether the royal theory held any truth, one fact remained undeniable. Someone had cared for Caspar before his arrival. His clothing had been maintained. His limited writing ability required instruction. The letters accompanying him had not appeared by chance. Someone, somewhere, had prepared him for this moment. But why reveal him at all? If secrecy had protected him for years, why suddenly allow him to appear in one of Germany's largest cities? That question has never received a universally accepted answer. As months passed, Caspar slowly adapted to public life. He learned language more quickly. He interacted with visitors. He developed friendships. Teachers attempted to educate him, observing remarkable progress despite his unusual beginning. His growing ability to communicate allowed him to describe fragments of his earlier life. According to his own account, he remembered spending nearly his entire childhood inside a small, dark room. He described little furniture, minimal human contact, almost no opportunity to explore. Food appeared mysteriously without explanation. His caretaker rarely spoke. Whether these memories reflected literal truth, childhood misunderstanding, or later reconstruction remains difficult to determine. Modern psychology reminds us that memory itself is imperfect. Early experiences can become distorted over time, especially when trauma, isolation, or suggestion influence recollection. Some historians therefore caution against accepting every statement literally. Others argue that even imperfect memories may preserve important truths. The challenge lies in separating reliable evidence from interpretation. Medical experts also offered differing opinions. Some believed Caspar's physical condition supported prolonged isolation. Others argue that his behavior could have resulted from social deprivation occurring over a shorter period. Still others questioned whether elements of his presentation had been consciously or unconsciously exaggerated after becoming the focus of public attention. The debate demonstrated how easily extraordinary cases attract competing interpretations. Each observer viewed the same evidence through a different lens. Scientists sought biological explanations. Educators focused on learning. Politicians considered hidden motives. Journalists searched for compelling stories. The public searched for certainty. Instead, certainty remained elusive. One particularly interesting aspect of the mystery involved the letters delivered alongside Caspar. Handwriting analysis, linguistic study, and historical investigation have all attempted to determine their authenticity. Were both letters written by the same person? Do they originate at different times? Were they genuine attempts to explain Caspar's past, or carefully constructed fabrications designed to mislead authorities? Even today, experts disagree. The documents raise almost as many questions as they answer. Every clue seems to divide into multiple possibilities. That pattern has become one defining feature of the Caspar Hauser mystery. Evidence exists, interpretations multiply. Definitive conclusions remain just beyond reach. As years passed, Caspar continued attracting attention from scholars, aristocrats, and curious visitors. His life became increasingly public. With publicity came admiration from some and skepticism from others. Several critics suggested he had deliberately encouraged mysterious stories surrounding himself. Others strongly rejected that accusation, pointing to consistent observations made by independent witnesses shortly after his arrival. The disagreement reflected a larger challenge facing historians. How should unusual historical cases be evaluated when surviving evidence is incomplete? Absolute certainty is rare. Instead, researchers compare documents, eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and historical context, gradually building the most reasonable explanation available. Sometimes those pieces fit together neatly. Sometimes they refuse to do so. Caspar Hauser belongs firmly to the second category. Modern technology has transformed archaeology, genetics, and historical research in remarkable ways. Ancient manuscripts can be digitally restored. Forgotten settlements can be identified beneath forests using airborne scanning. DNA has solved mysteries once thought impossible. Yet Caspar's story still resists complete explanation. Many crucial records no longer exist. Potential witnesses disappeared generations ago. Physical evidence remains limited. The mystery survives because history preserved just enough information to provoke endless questions, but not enough to resolve them. Perhaps that explains why Caspar Hauser continues capturing attention nearly 2 centuries after his unexpected arrival. His story touches something universal. Everyone wonders where they came from. Everyone seeks identity. Everyone hopes the past can eventually be understood. Caspar offered none of those comforts. He appeared without a verifiable beginning, carrying fragments instead of answers. Whether he was an isolated child, the victim of hidden circumstances, an unknown traveler caught in extraordinary events, or someone whose true origins will never be recovered, his story reminds us that history is not always a complete record. Sometimes it is a collection of missing pages. And occasionally, those missing pages become far more fascinating than the chapters that survived. The disappearance of the La Salle colony survivors. In the closing years of the 17th century, European maps still contained vast stretches of uncertainty. Coastlines faded into blank spaces. Rivers were drawn from rumor as often as observation. Entire regions were represented by little more than hopeful sketches and scattered reports from explorers who had survived journeys into unfamiliar landscapes. It was an age when a single expedition could redefine geography or disappear so completely that history would spend centuries trying to understand what went wrong. One of the most enduring examples began with an ambitious French explorer named René Robert Tavelay, better known as La Salle. By the early 1680s, La Salle had earned recognition for his travels through North America. His expeditions along the Mississippi River convinced him that France could establish a powerful presence deep within the continent. A carefully placed colony near the river's mouth would strengthen trade, secure a strategic territory, and provide a gateway into the vast interior. It was an ambitious vision, and the French crown approved the plan. But there was one problem that no one fully appreciated before the ships left Europe. Finding the exact mouth of the Mississippi River was far more difficult than drawing it on a map. Navigation during the 17th century depended on skill, experience, and instruments that were impressive for their time but far from perfect. Latitude could be estimated with reasonable confidence. Longitude, however, remained one of the greatest scientific challenges of the era. Even experienced navigators sometimes found themselves hundreds of miles from their intended destination. That single limitation would shape everything that followed. In 1684, La Salle departed France with several ships carrying soldiers, craftsmen, families, supplies, livestock, and enough equipment to establish a permanent settlement. The expedition represented more than exploration. It carried the hopes of creating an entirely new French community in North America. Months later, after crossing the Atlantic and entering the Gulf of Mexico, uncertainty began to grow. Instead of locating the Mississippi River, the expedition sailed past it without realizing the mistake. By the time the error became clear, correcting it proved nearly impossible. Rather than arriving at the river that had inspired the entire mission, the expedition eventually reached the coast of what is now Matagorda Bay in present-day Texas, hundreds of miles west of the intended destination. At first glance, the bay may have appeared promising. Protected waters, nearby forests, access to fresh resources. It seemed suitable enough to establish a temporary base while searching for the Mississippi. But temporary solutions have a way of becoming permanent when circumstances refuse to cooperate. The colony that emerged along the Texas coast was never supposed to exist there. Everything that followed unfolded under the shadow of that original navigational mistake. Life became difficult almost immediately. The settlers had arrived with plans designed for one location, but found themselves living in another. Supplies had to last longer than expected. Local geography differed from their assumptions. Communication with France became uncertain. Every decision carried greater consequences because the colony stood far from the place where it had been intended to flourish. Even so, the settlers persevered. They constructed buildings, organized daily work, searched for food, attempted to understand the unfamiliar landscape surrounding them. Archaeological discoveries made centuries later reveal traces of these efforts. Excavations have uncovered structural remains, tools, ceramics, metal objects, and other evidence showing that the settlers invested considerable effort into building a functioning community. These discoveries tell an important story. The colony was not abandoned immediately. People lived there, worked there, adapted there. For a time, hope remained alive. La Salle himself refused to believe the mission had failed. Convinced that the Mississippi River could not be far away, he organized multiple overland expeditions to locate it. Each journey carried enormous risk. The terrain stretched across unfamiliar plains, rivers, marshes, and forests. Accurate maps scarcely existed. Seasonal weather could transform travel into an exhausting struggle. Every mile increased the distance between the explorers and the fragile settlement waiting behind them. Yet each expedition returned without success. The Mississippi remained elusive. Instead of bringing relief, every unsuccessful search consumed valuable time and precious resources. The colony entered a difficult cycle. The longer it remained isolated, the harder survival became. The fewer resources remained for exploration. Modern historians often emphasize that the greatest threat facing remote settlements was not always one dramatic event. More often, it was accumulation, a delayed shipment, a damaged vessel, limited supplies, unexpected weather, misjudged geography. Small setbacks gradually combined until recovery became almost impossible. The La Salle colony illustrates this pattern remarkably well. No single mistake guaranteed failure. Rather, a chain of interconnected problems slowly narrowed every available option. Historical records indicate that internal challenges also emerged. Leadership decisions became increasingly important as conditions deteriorated. Disagreements over priorities, logistics, and future plans naturally developed within a community facing prolonged uncertainty. Such tensions were hardly unusual. Any isolated settlement depending on limited resources would experience difficult decisions about food, labor, exploration, and security. Yet even acknowledging these pressures does not fully explain the colony's ultimate fate. That mystery begins after the settlement itself. Over time, the number of surviving colonists steadily declined. Some returned on ships when opportunities arose. Others joined exploratory parties. A few vanished into the surrounding landscape during dangerous journeys. Eventually, organized French presence at the colony came to an end. But what happened to every remaining survivor? That question has fascinated historians for generations. Unlike many historical mysteries centered on missing artifacts or forgotten documents, this mystery concerns people, real individuals whose lives slowly disappeared from the historical record. The surviving evidence offers possibilities rather than certainty. One explanation suggests that some colonists attempted to reach other European settlements. Travel across hundreds of miles of unfamiliar territory would have been extraordinarily difficult, yet not impossible. Determined survivors sometimes covered remarkable distances under desperate circumstances. If such journeys occurred, only fragments of documentation remain. Another possibility proposes that certain survivors became integrated into indigenous communities living throughout the region. The Gulf Coast supported numerous native societies long before European arrival. These communities possessed extensive knowledge of local environments, seasonal resources, and regional travel routes. Interactions between European settlers and indigenous peoples varied enormously depending on circumstance. Some encounters led to cooperation, others involved misunderstanding, still others remain largely undocumented. Because written records from both sides are incomplete, historians cannot confidently reconstruct every relationship that developed around the colony. This uncertainty creates one of the central challenges of studying early colonial North America. European documents often focused on military leaders, official reports, or political objectives. Ordinary settlers rarely received detailed attention. When records disappeared or were never written in the first place, the personal experiences of many individuals faded with them. Archaeology has therefore become one of the most valuable tools for investigating the La Salle colony. Excavations near Matagorda Bay have transformed understanding of the settlement itself. Recovered artifacts reveal everyday routines rather than grand historical events. Iron nails suggest construction. Broken pottery reflects domestic life. Animal remains provide clues about diet. Fragments of tools illustrate repair work and craftsmanship. Each object represents a quiet moment, once lived by someone whose name may never appear in surviving documents. Together, these discoveries replace abstraction with humanity. Instead of imagining anonymous colonists, we begin to picture families preparing meals, workers repairing equipment, children growing up in unfamiliar surroundings, and leaders trying to solve problems without knowing whether help would ever arrive. History often feels distant because it records kingdoms, wars, and explorers. Archaeology reminds us that history was also lived one ordinary day at a time. Despite these discoveries, the final chapter remains incomplete. Excavation can reveal where buildings stood. It cannot always reveal where every person went afterward. Some mysteries survive not because evidence never existed, but because time gradually erased it. Wood decays. Paper deteriorates. Coastal landscapes shift. Storms reshape shorelines. Generations pass. The environment surrounding Matagorda Bay has changed repeatedly since the 17th century, altering the very landscape where investigators search for answers. This constant transformation complicates historical reconstruction. A campsite visible in one century may disappear beneath sediment in another. A pathway may become marshland. A shoreline may migrate hundreds of meters. The geography encountered by modern archaeologists differs significantly from the landscape known by La Salle's settlers. That changing environment explains why new discoveries continue to emerge even after centuries of research. Advances in archaeological technology have expanded these efforts. Remote sensing techniques help identify buried features without extensive excavation. Careful soil analysis reveals patterns invisible from the surface. Digital mapping allows researchers to compare historical coastlines with modern terrain. Each new method contributes another small piece to a puzzle that remains incomplete. Importantly, none of these discoveries has produced a dramatic final answer. Instead, they have deepened appreciation for the complexity of the colony's story. The mystery today is no longer simply, what happened? It has become, how did so many ordinary decisions combine to create such an extraordinary disappearance? That question carries lessons extending far beyond one settlement. History often remembers great victories and catastrophic defeats. Less attention is given to gradual decline, the slow accumulation of setbacks that quietly reshape lives before anyone recognizes the full consequences. The La Salle colony reflects precisely that kind of history. Its disappearance was not the result of a single unforgettable moment preserved in dramatic detail. Rather, it unfolded through uncertainty, distance, environmental challenges, incomplete information, and the relentless difficulty of sustaining hope in an unfamiliar world. Perhaps that is why the mystery continues to resonate. There is no obvious ending, no definitive final entry in a journal, no single eyewitness who explains everything. Instead, the colony leaves behind scattered artifacts, fragmented reports, and unanswered questions stretching across centuries. The people who once stood on the shores of Matagorda Bay undoubtedly expected their settlement to become the beginning of a lasting community. Instead, it became one of North America's most intriguing historical mysteries, a reminder that sometimes the greatest disappearances are not sudden at all. Sometimes they happen gradually until history itself struggles to remember where the trail finally disappeared. The abandonment of the Popham colony. In the summer of 1607, two English colonies began life on opposite sides of the Atlantic world. One would eventually grow into a lasting settlement, remembered in nearly every history book. The other would quietly disappear, leaving behind only scattered records, archaeological remains, and a question that has puzzled historians for centuries. The forgotten settlement stood along the rugged coast of present-day Maine. Known today as the Popham colony, it existed for little more than a year. Unlike many lost settlements, it did not vanish overnight. There was no single dramatic event that erased it from history. Instead, it was established with careful planning, supported by experienced leaders, supplied by England, and built with remarkable determination. Yet despite all of those advantages, the colony was abandoned so completely that its story nearly slipped from public memory. Its disappearance raises an intriguing question. How can a settlement that appeared to have every opportunity for success simply come to an end? To understand the mystery, it helps to return to England at the beginning of the 17th century. European nations were expanding their influence across the Atlantic. Spain had already established powerful colonies. France was strengthening its presence in North America. England, eager to compete, began investing in settlements that could expand trade, secure resources, and establish permanent footholds along the continent's eastern coastline. The Popham colony emerged from those ambitions. Unlike spontaneous migrations driven by desperate circumstances, this was a carefully organized venture. Investors expected returns. Leaders carried written instructions. Skilled workers were recruited for specific tasks. Carpenters, blacksmiths, soldiers, and craftsmen all boarded ships knowing they would be building more than temporary shelters. They intended to create a lasting community. When the expedition reached the mouth of the Kennebec River in 1607, the location appeared promising. A broad river offered access inland, dense forests supplied abundant timber. The surrounding coastline provided natural harbors. To those arriving from England, the landscape suggested opportunity as much as challenge. Construction began almost immediately. The settlers worked with remarkable speed. They built a fortified settlement, erected homes, established storage buildings, and created defensive structures designed to protect both people and supplies. Archaeological excavations conducted centuries later have confirmed the impressive pace of this construction. Foundations, post holes, and recovered artifacts reveal a settlement that was carefully planned rather than hastily assembled. Perhaps the colony's most remarkable achievement came from its shipbuilders. Using timber harvested from nearby forests, they constructed the Virginia, one of the earliest English-built ocean-going ships in North America. The project required advanced craftsmanship, coordinated labor, and access to specialized tools. It demonstrated that the settlers possessed considerable skill despite the isolation of their new home. This accomplishment challenges a common assumption about early colonies. The Popham settlers were not merely struggling to survive each day. They were capable of completing sophisticated engineering projects while simultaneously building an entirely new settlement. That makes the colony's eventual abandonment even more surprising. If they could accomplish so much in such a short time, why did they leave? One explanation often begins with the environment. Modern visitors to coastal Maine experience beautiful summers, cool autumns, and long winters. For people arriving from England with limited knowledge of local conditions, seasonal changes could dramatically affect daily life. Temperatures dropped quickly, snow accumulated, rivers froze, travel became more difficult, and familiar agricultural routines no longer applied in quite the same way. Yet historians caution against treating winter as the entire explanation. The settlers expected difficult weather. They had prepared for it. Northern Europe itself experienced harsh winters, and many colonists already understood seasonal hardship. While the climate undoubtedly presented challenges, it alone cannot fully explain the colony's short lifespan. Food supplies represent another important consideration. Maintaining a remote settlement required careful planning. Imported provisions had to last for months. Hunting, fishing, and gathering supplemented available resources, but success depended on local knowledge that newcomers had not yet fully acquired. Even small disruptions could create lasting consequences. A delayed supply ship, an unsuccessful harvest, unexpected spoilage. Each setback reduced flexibility, forcing leaders to make increasingly difficult decisions. Still, surviving records suggest that the settlement continued functioning through its first year. The colony did not collapse into immediate crisis. Instead, evidence points towards something more gradual. Leadership changes played a significant role. Among the colony's principal figures was George Popham, whose leadership helped organize the settlement during its earliest months. His experience offered stability during an uncertain beginning. Then circumstances changed. George Popham died during the colony's first winter. His passing created an immediate leadership transition, while new leaders stepped forward. Replacing experienced leadership in an isolated settlement was never a simple matter. Every decision carried greater weight because communication with England required months rather than days. Another development soon followed. News arrived from England that Sir John Popham, one of the colony's principal financial supporters, had also died. At first glance, this event occurred thousands of miles away and might seem unrelated. In reality, it mattered enormously. Colonial ventures depended upon investors willing to provide money, equipment, and political support. The death of a major sponsor introduced uncertainty into the colony's future. Would financial backing continue? Would replacement investors remain equally committed? Would England still view the settlement as a priority? No immediate answers existed. The colony suddenly faced uncertainty both at home and abroad. Historians increasingly view these developments as interconnected rather than isolated. The environment posed challenges. Leadership changed. Financial support became uncertain. Logistics remained complicated. Individually, each problem might have been manageable. Together, they created a very different picture. Archaeological research reinforces this interpretation. Excavations at the Popham site reveal organization rather than chaos. Buildings appear deliberately constructed. Defensive work suggests planning. Everyday objects, including ceramics, tools, nails, glass fragments, and personal belongings, reflect ordinary community life rather than sudden abandonment under immediate danger. This evidence matters because archaeology often tells a quieter story than written history. Instead of dramatic endings, it reveals routines. Someone prepared meals using recovered cooking vessels. Someone repaired equipment with iron tools. Someone worked wood inside workshops. Someone stood watch along the fortifications. The settlement functioned as a living community. Its people were not simply waiting for failure. Relations with indigenous communities also formed part of the colony's experience. The region had long been home to native peoples possessing deep knowledge of local waterways, seasonal cycles, fishing grounds, and forest resources. Contact between English settlers and indigenous groups involved trade, observation, diplomacy, and occasional misunderstanding, much like many early colonial encounters elsewhere. Modern historians emphasize that these relationships cannot be reduced to simple narratives of either cooperation or conflict. Human interactions were far more complex. Different communities pursued different goals. Circumstances evolved over time. Mutual curiosity existed alongside uncertainty. Because surviving records are incomplete, many individual experiences remain unknown. This absence of detail contributes to the broader mystery surrounding the colony. Written documents preserve official decisions more readily than everyday conversations. We know far less about how ordinary settlers adapted socially than how leaders organized supplies. That imbalance leaves significant gaps in the historical record. One of the colony's greatest puzzles concerns its apparent potential. Compared with some other early settlements, Popham possessed several advantages. It had skilled workers, access to timber, a navigable river, support from England, demonstrated engineering ability. Why then was the decision made to leave rather than continue? Some scholars argue that the answer lies in expectations. Investors often measured colonial success quickly. If immediate progress failed to match anticipated returns, enthusiasm could diminish. Maintaining distant settlements demanded continued commitment, and not every venture received unlimited patience. Others emphasized practical realities. The settlers may have concluded that relocating offered better long-term prospects than remaining where uncertainty continued to grow. Importantly, the evidence suggests an organized departure rather than a desperate escape. Many colonists returned to England. The Virginia, the ship they had built in North America, completed the Atlantic crossing, demonstrating both the vessel's quality and the remarkable capabilities of the settlement's craftsmen. That successful voyage carries symbolic significance. The colony proved capable of producing a seaworthy ship, yet it did not survive as a permanent community. Sometimes success in one area cannot overcome difficulties in another. Centuries passed before archaeologists rediscovered the colony's precise location. For generations, historians relied primarily on surviving documents. The landscape itself had changed. Vegetation reclaimed former building sites. Natural processes gradually concealed traces of daily life. Then careful archaeological investigation transformed understanding. Excavations uncovered structural remains that matched historical descriptions. Artifacts confirmed the identities of the settlers. The layout of the fort emerged from beneath the soil. What had once been an uncertain location became a documented archaeological site. These discoveries answered one important question. The colony had existed exactly where historical records suggested. Yet they also reinforced another mystery. Why had such a carefully constructed settlement lasted only a single year? Unlike legendary lost cities swallowed by jungle or buried beneath sand, Popham did not disappear because people forgot where it stood. It disappeared because people chose to leave. That distinction makes the mystery unusually human. The settlement's fate was shaped not by myth, but by decisions. Real individuals weighed risks, considered available information, evaluated uncertain futures, and ultimately concluded that abandoning the colony represented the better option. Whether they believed the decision would become permanent remains impossible to know. Perhaps some expected to return, perhaps others viewed the departure as temporary. History records the outcome, but not every private conversation that preceded it. The silence surrounding those conversations continues to invite thoughtful speculation. Today, visitors to the archaeological site encounter a peaceful landscape. The forests remain. The river continues flowing toward the Atlantic. Birdsong replaces the sounds of hammers and saws that once echoed across the settlement. Very little on the surface hints that ambitious plans unfolded here more than 4 centuries ago. Yet beneath the ground, carefully preserved evidence continues to reshape historical understanding. Each excavation adds another detail, another artifact, another clue, not toward a dramatic conspiracy, but toward a richer understanding of how fragile early colonial ventures truly were. The mystery of the Popham colony endures because it challenges familiar assumptions. History often celebrates settlements that survived and expanded. Those that quietly faded receive far less attention, even though they reveal just as much about the realities of exploration, ambition, and human resilience. The abandoned buildings, recovered tools, and carefully crafted ship all point to a community that worked diligently toward a future it never fully reached. In that sense, Popham is more than a forgotten colony. It is a reminder that history is shaped not only by famous successes, but also by promising beginnings that ended in silence, leaving future generations to reconstruct their stories from scattered artifacts, incomplete records, and the enduring questions they left behind. The missing Franklin relic cache. Few places on Earth guard their secrets as completely as the Arctic. Its landscape appears almost timeless. Endless fields of ice stretch toward the horizon. Winds reshape the snow without leaving permanent traces. Coastlines freeze, thaw, and freeze again. A location that seems familiar one season can look entirely different the next. In such an environment, even the most carefully planned expedition can leave behind surprisingly little evidence. For generations, explorers viewed the Arctic as one of the last great geographical frontiers. Somewhere beyond its frozen waterways lay a dream that had captivated European nations for centuries. A navigable sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Known as the Northwest Passage, it promised faster trade, greater influence, and a place in history for whoever successfully charted it. Many expeditions attempted the journey. Most returned with valuable observations but incomplete success. Some never returned at all. Among them, none has inspired more investigation than the expedition led by Sir John Franklin in 1845. While much has been learned about the voyage over the years, one of its most intriguing mysteries is not simply what happened to the expedition. It is what happened to the records and relics that could have explained everything. Somewhere in the Arctic, historians believe a cache of information may once have existed. Whether it was lost, scattered, destroyed, or still lies undiscovered beneath layers of ice and stone remains one of exploration's greatest unanswered questions. The Franklin expedition departed England with confidence and experience. The ships were considered technologically advanced for their era. They carried provisions intended to support a lengthy voyage, scientific instruments for careful observation, and officers familiar with naval exploration. To many observers, this appeared to be the expedition most likely to succeed where others had fallen short. As the ships sailed north, communication with the outside world gradually disappeared. That was expected. Arctic expeditions often spent months beyond contact. What no one anticipated was the silence that followed. When years passed without reliable news, concern steadily grew. Search expeditions eventually set out across the Arctic, hoping to locate the missing crews or discover evidence explaining their fate. Those searches transformed the mystery. Instead of one expedition exploring unknown waters, There were now dozens of journeys following scattered clues across one of the harshest environments on Earth. Each expedition recovered fragments, a campsite, a discarded object, a written message, human-made items preserved by the cold. Individually, these discoveries were significant. Collectively, they suggested that the Franklin expedition had continued far longer than many initially believed. Yet one expected source of information remained frustratingly absent: official records. Naval expeditions of the 19th century relied heavily on documentation. Officers maintained journals. Navigators recorded observations. Scientific notes described weather, geography, and environmental conditions. Written records served practical purposes during the voyage and historical purposes afterward. If preserved, those documents could have answered countless questions. Instead, only a small number of written messages have ever been recovered. The most famous among them provides valuable information about the expedition's progress before communication ceased. It confirms certain dates, identifies key developments, and establishes that circumstances changed dramatically over time. Remarkably, however, the message raises almost as many questions as it answers. It offers only a brief snapshot. It does not explain every decision. It does not describe every event. Most importantly, it suggests that additional records almost certainly existed. Where did those records go? That question lies at the heart of the missing relic cache mystery. Some historians believe the expedition maintained journals until very late in its journey. If so, those journals represented an extraordinary record of Arctic exploration, navigation, weather, scientific observations, daily routines, leadership decisions. Every page would provide insight into one of history's most famous expeditions, yet no complete collection has ever been found. One explanation is surprisingly straightforward: paper does not last forever. Although Arctic temperatures can preserve organic materials for remarkable lengths of time, preservation depends upon many factors. Moisture, shifting ice, seasonal thawing, and repeated freezing gradually affect exposed objects. If documents remained unprotected, decades or centuries could eventually erase them. Another possibility considers movement rather than destruction. The Arctic is not a motionless landscape. Sea ice drifts, coastlines change, snow accumulates, spring melt alters terrain. Objects left in one location may gradually shift through entirely natural processes. A small container placed carefully beneath stones in one century may become buried beneath sediment in another. Researchers searching today are not necessarily examining the same landscape encountered by Franklin's crews. This constantly changing environment complicates every archaeological investigation. Modern technology has improved the search considerably. Satellite imagery reveals subtle terrain features. Round penetrating radar assists in locating buried objects. Precise mapping allows researchers to compare historical observations with modern geography. Even underwater exploration has expanded dramatically through remotely operated vehicles capable of examining shipwrecks beneath Arctic waters. Each technological advance increases the possibility that new discoveries remain ahead. Recent decades have demonstrated exactly that. Long after many believed significant discoveries were unlikely, investigators located the expedition's ships resting beneath cold northern waters. The discoveries represented milestones in maritime archaeology. Preserved sections of the vessels offered remarkable glimpses into 19th century naval construction, cabins, equipment, personal belongings. Every carefully documented artifact added another piece to the expedition's story. Yet even these extraordinary discoveries did not immediately resolve the mystery surrounding the missing records. Finding a ship is one challenge. Finding fragile paper documents after generations beneath Arctic conditions is another entirely. The distinction matters. A wooden structure may survive under favorable conditions. Ink on paper presents a much greater preservation challenge. Still, optimism remains. Archaeologists have repeatedly demonstrated that seemingly impossible discoveries sometimes become reality. Documents have survived inside sealed containers. Organic materials have endured where environmental conditions proved unusually stable. Unexpected preservation has rewritten historical understanding before. There is no guarantee that Franklin's missing records survived, but neither can their absence be assumed with certainty. Some researchers have proposed another intriguing possibility. Perhaps the expedition intentionally stored important materials in more than one location. This practice would not have been unreasonable. Explorers operating across difficult terrain often distributed equipment and supplies to reduce risk. If one location became inaccessible, another might still remain available. If records were separated in a similar manner, some may have been recovered while others remain undiscovered. The challenge lies in proving such a theory. Historical investigation depends upon evidence, not possibility alone. Without physical confirmation, responsible historians distinguish between reasonable hypotheses and established fact. That careful distinction has helped maintain credibility throughout decades of Franklin research. The mystery remains compelling precisely because investigators resist drawing conclusions unsupported by available evidence. Another fascinating aspect of the search involves relics collected during later expeditions. Search teams recovered numerous personal objects associated with Franklin's cruise: buttons, utensils, navigation equipment, uniform items, scientific instruments. These artifacts reveal ordinary aspects of daily life aboard 19th-century exploration vessels. They remind us that the expedition consisted not merely of famous officers, but of individuals carrying familiar possessions into an unfamiliar world. Each recovered object narrows the distance between modern observers and people who lived nearly 2 centuries ago. Yet personal belongings rarely explain an entire story. Documents do. A journal records thoughts. A logbook records decisions. A chart records discoveries. Together they transform isolated artifacts into coherent narratives. That is why historians continue searching so persistently for additional written material. The greatest treasure associated with the Franklin expedition may not be gold, rare objects, or valuable cargo. It may simply be information, knowledge capable of answering questions that have endured for generations. The Arctic itself plays an active role in preserving the mystery. Unlike historical sites located in cities or settled landscapes, Franklin's world remains remote. Weather limits excavation seasons. Ice conditions influence travel. Environmental protection requires careful planning. Researchers must balance scientific investigation with preservation of fragile archaeological resources. Every expedition demands extensive preparation before even a single artifact is examined. Patience, therefore, becomes as important as technology. Major discoveries sometimes result from years of careful planning, followed by only a few weeks of field work. Progress occurs gradually: a single recovered object, a newly identified campsite, an overlooked feature visible only under specific environmental conditions. Piece by piece, the larger picture grows clearer. Yet the central mystery persists. Was there once a cache containing journals, maps, observations, or official reports waiting to be delivered home? If so, where is it now? Perhaps hidden beneath shifting Arctic gravel. Perhaps sealed within an undiscovered compartment. Perhaps scattered ongles by natural forces. Or perhaps it simply never survived the passage of time. Each possibility remains plausible because the available evidence remains incomplete. This uncertainty has inspired generations of researchers while also encouraging careful restraint. Unlike fictional mysteries resolved through dramatic final revelations, real historical investigation often advances through incremental discovery. One artifact changes a timeline. One document corrects a misconception. One excavation reshapes decades of interpretation. The Franklin mystery illustrates this process beautifully. Every confirmed discovery has expanded understanding without eliminating every unanswered question. In many ways, that is what makes the search so enduring. The goal is not merely to solve a historical puzzle. It is to understand the experiences of people who ventured into one of the world's most demanding environments with remarkable determination and extraordinary optimism. Whether the missing cache of records still exists is a question only future discoveries may answer. Until then, the Arctic continues to guard its silence with remarkable consistency. Its ice preserves fragments while concealing others. Its landscape reveals clues slowly, often decades apart. And somewhere among those frozen coastlines may still rest the final pages of a story that history has been trying to finish for nearly 200 years. The vanished witnesses of Zanzibar mission history is often built from voices, letters preserved in archives, journals written by travelers, official reports sent across oceans, personal accounts passed from one generation to the next. Together, these fragments allow historians to reconstruct moments that would otherwise disappear forever. But what happens when the voices themselves are lost? What if the people who experienced an event firsthand never had the opportunity to tell their own stories, or their words simply failed to survive the passage of time? That question lies at the heart of one of colonial North America's most thought-provoking historical mysteries, the story of the San Saba mission. Unlike mysteries centered on hidden treasure or forgotten monuments, this one revolves around something far more difficult to recover: human testimony. The San Saba mission was established in the mid-18th century during a period of expanding Spanish influence across what is now central Texas. Spain hoped to strengthen its presence in the region through a network of missions, settlements, and military outposts. These communities served multiple purposes. They encouraged agriculture, supported trade, reinforced political claims, and created connections between distant territories. San Saba was part of that larger vision. Its founders believed the mission could become a place where relationships with local indigenous communities would develop through cooperation and shared interests. On paper, the plan appeared practical. It reflected decades of Spanish colonial experience elsewhere in the Americas. Yet every frontier was different. The cultural landscape surrounding the San Saba River was extraordinarily complex. Numerous indigenous nations already lived, traveled, hunted, and traded throughout the region. Each community maintained its own traditions, leadership structures, alliances, and priorities. To outsiders, the frontier often appeared as a vast, open space. In reality, it was an intricate network of established relationships stretching across hundreds of miles. Any new settlement entered that existing world, rather than creating one from nothing. From the beginning, San Saba faced challenges that extended far beyond construction or logistics. Its success depended upon trust. Trust could not be built quickly. It required communication, mutual understanding, and patience, qualities often tested by the realities of life on a distant frontier. Historical records indicate that the mission remained active for only a relatively short period before a major attack transformed its future. The event became one of the most significant episodes in the region's colonial history. Buildings were damaged. The settlement ceased functioning as originally intended. Survivors scattered to other locations. Official investigations followed. Yet, despite the importance of the event, historians continue to face an unusual problem. Many of the people who experienced those days most directly left little or no surviving testimony. Instead, the historical record relies heavily on administrative documents created after the fact. These reports serve an important purpose. They preserve dates, summarize events, identify locations, describe official responses. Without them, much of the story would have disappeared entirely. But administrative reports also have limitations. They were written for governments, for military commanders, for church officials. Their primary goal was documentation, not personal storytelling. As a result, countless individual experiences remain hidden behind formal language. Imagine standing inside a settlement where uncertainty has gradually grown over weeks or months. You notice changing patterns around you. Conversations become more cautious. Travel requires additional planning. Small decisions begin carrying greater consequences. How would those experiences feel? Official reports rarely capture such details. Instead, they compress complicated human experiences into concise summaries. That process, while practical, leaves historians searching for voices that no longer exist. The mystery, therefore, is not whether the attack occurred. Historical evidence leaves little doubt that it did. The mystery concerns everything that surrounded it. What did ordinary residents believe before events unfolded? How did families adapt to daily life in such an isolated place? What conversations took place that no document ever recorded? Those unanswered questions transform San Saba into something larger than a military or colonial event. It becomes a reminder of how easily history can lose its most personal dimensions. Modern researchers approach this challenge from several directions. Traditional archival work remains essential. Historians examine letters, church records, government correspondence, and surviving reports written by individuals connected to the mission. Every newly discovered document has the potential to clarify uncertain details. Sometimes a single overlooked sentence changes an entire interpretation. Yet written evidence represents only part of the investigation. Archaeology has become equally important. Excavations at the mission site allow researchers to study daily life independently of official records. Recovered ceramics reveal patterns of cooking and storage. Metal tools illustrate craftsmanship and repair. Glass fragments, nails, building foundations, and household objects provide clues about how the settlement functioned before its abandonment. These discoveries speak quietly. Unlike written documents, artifacts cannot describe emotions or intentions. Instead, they reveal routines. Someone prepared meals here. Someone repaired a door. Someone stored supplies inside this building. Someone walked these paths every day. Collectively, these ordinary activities create a fuller picture of the community than official reports alone could ever provide. One particularly fascinating aspect of the San Saba mystery involves perspective. Most surviving European records naturally reflect the viewpoints of Spanish officials because they were the individuals responsible for producing written documentation. Indigenous perspectives, however, often survives through oral traditions rather than written archives. Over generations, some traditions changed, while others were never formally recorded at all. This imbalance presents historians with an important challenge. How can researchers reconstruct a complete story when one side produced extensive written documentation and another relied primarily upon spoken history? Modern scholarship increasingly recognizes the importance of combining multiple forms of evidence: archaeology, historical geography, ethnography, linguistics, environmental studies. Together, these disciplines create a broader understanding than any single source could provide. Rather than asking only what happened, researchers also ask, how do we know? That question encourages careful evaluation of every surviving piece of evidence. Consider the landscape itself. Today, the area surrounding the former mission appears peaceful. Rolling terrain, native vegetation, and the flowing San Saba River create an environment that seems remarkably calm. It is easy to forget that centuries ago, the same landscape served as the meeting point of different cultures, competing political interests, and rapidly changing alliances. Landscapes often preserve history in subtle ways. Ancient pathways influence modern roads. River crossings remain important for generations. Settlement locations reveal practical decisions about water, transportation, and resources. Even after buildings disappear, geography continues telling part of the story. San Saba demonstrates this beautifully. The mission's location was not chosen at random. Access to water supported agriculture. Nearby travel routes connected distant regions. The surrounding environment offered opportunities as well as challenges. Understanding the landscape helps explain why people invested so much effort in establishing a permanent community there, despite the uncertainties of frontier life. Another reason the mystery persists involves the nature of colonial administration itself. Governments valued efficiency. Reports often condensed complicated events into manageable summaries, suitable for officials hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Imagine receiving news in Mexico City or Madrid. Administrators required concise information: who was involved, what occurred, what actions should follow. Lengthy personal narratives rarely fit that purpose. Consequently, many ordinary voices disappeared during the reporting process. Historians sometimes describe this phenomenon as administrative compression. Complex human experiences become simplified into official categories. Names become numbers. Individual stories become statistics. Personal memories become brief paragraphs. The process was understandable from a bureaucratic perspective. Yet centuries later, it leaves researchers wondering about everything that was omitted. Technology has introduced new methods for exploring these questions. High-resolution mapping reveals subtle archaeological features difficult to detect from ground level. Geophysical surveys identify buried foundations without disturbing sensitive sites. Digital reconstruction allows researchers to visualize how the mission may have appeared during its brief existence. These techniques do not recover missing testimony. They do, however, provide valuable context for interpreting surviving evidence. Piece by piece, the settlement becomes easier to understand. Still, technology cannot replace voices that were never recorded. That absence remains the defining characteristic of the San Saba mystery. Unlike unsolved puzzles involving hidden chambers or unidentified artifacts, this mystery reminds us that the greatest historical losses are sometimes intangible. A conversation, a memory, a personal reflection. Once gone, such things rarely return. Perhaps this explains why the story continues to resonate with historians today. It challenges the assumption that written history always captures the complete picture. In reality, every archive reflects choices: what was recorded, what was preserved, what was considered important, and, inevitably, what was left behind. San Saba stands as a powerful example of those limitations. The surviving documents are invaluable. Without them, the mission might be almost entirely forgotten. Yet they also highlight how much remains beyond our reach. Who are the children growing up within the settlement? What hopes brought families to such a distant frontier? How did indigenous communities interpret the arrival of newcomers? What everyday acts of cooperation, misunderstanding, friendship, or negotiation unfolded beyond the attention of official record keepers? These questions may never receive complete answers, and that is precisely what makes the mystery so enduring. The San Saba mission is not remembered solely because an important historical event occurred there. It is remembered because it illustrates how history itself can become incomplete. Buildings may leave foundations. Artifacts may survive beneath the soil. Official reports may remain safely preserved in archives, but human experience is far more fragile. When individual voices disappear, historians are left reconstructing lives from scattered clues, always aware that behind every surviving document once stood countless stories that were never written down. In the end, the greatest mystery of San Saba may not be what happened on a single day. It may be everything we can no longer hear. The ordinary conversations, personal memories, and lived experiences that vanished with the witnesses themselves, leaving history to speak in echoes rather than complete sentences. The hidden colony of the Gwale Coast. Some historical mysteries are difficult because the evidence has been destroyed. Others remain unsolved because the evidence was never meant to stay in one place. Along the southeastern coastline of what is now the U.S. state of Georgia, generations of explorers, missionaries, and settlers established communities that seemed permanent when viewed on contemporary maps. Yet many of those settlements proved surprisingly fluid. Villages shifted location. Mission sites expanded or contracted. Coastal islands changed shape. Populations merged, relocated, or reorganized in response to changing circumstances. Centuries later, historians discovered an unexpected problem. The colony they were trying to find may never have existed in a single fixed location. Instead, it appears to have been part of a constantly changing network of communities spread across what was historically known as the Gwale Coast. At first, this seems like a contradiction. A colony should have a clear location. A settlement should leave foundations. Buildings should create archaeological evidence that can be traced and documented. Yet the history of the Gwale Coast challenges those expectations. It reminds us that permanence is often an illusion, especially in landscapes shaped by tides, rivers, storms, and human adaptation. The Gwale Coast occupies a remarkable stretch of shoreline, where rivers meet the Atlantic Ocean through an intricate system of marshes, estuaries, barrier islands, and tidal channels. Even today, the region feels dynamic. Water levels change daily. Sandbars appear and disappear. Storms reshape coastlines with surprising speed. For people living there centuries ago, adapting to change was simply part of everyday life. Communities understood the rhythms of the environment. They recognized seasonal movements of fish. They knew which waterways remained navigable during different times of the year. They adjusted to conditions rather than resisting them. When European expeditions reached this coastline during the 16th century, they entered a world that was already highly organized. Indigenous communities had occupied the region for generations. Trade networks connected distant settlements. Travel routes followed rivers and coastal waterways. Knowledge of the landscape had been refined through centuries of observation. European colonists, however, often viewed settlements through a different lens. They expected fixed towns, permanent structures, clearly defined administrative centers. Maps reflected those expectations. Reality did not always cooperate. Historical documents describe missions, villages, and colonial outposts established throughout the Gwale region. Some appear repeatedly under the same name. Others seem to disappear altogether. Occasionally, one settlement seems to replace another without any obvious explanation. At first, historians assumed incomplete record-keeping explained these inconsistencies. Later research suggested something more interesting. Many communities were not static, they evolved. A settlement might relocate a short distance after severe weather. Families could merge with neighboring communities. Mission centers sometimes shifted as populations changed. Political alliances influenced where people chose to live. Rather than remaining fixed for decades, settlements adapted continuously to changing circumstances. This realization transformed how researchers approached the mystery. Instead of searching for one missing colony, they began investigating a living network of communities that expanded, contracted, relocated, and reorganized over time. The change in perspective proved significant. Sometimes solving a mystery requires changing the question itself. Archaeology has played an essential role in reshaping this understanding. Excavations throughout coastal Georgia have uncovered evidence of repeated occupation across numerous islands and mainland sites. Pottery fragments, animal remains, building materials, metal tools, glass beads, food preparation areas. Each discovery confirms human activity, but not always in ways that align neatly with historical maps. One site may reveal occupation earlier than expected. Another may continue later than written documents suggest. Some locations show overlapping periods of use, indicating that communities moved gradually rather than all at once. These findings reveal a pattern of flexibility. People adjusted to their environment instead of expecting the environment to remain unchanged. That adaptability complicates modern investigation. When archaeologists uncover evidence of a settlement, an important question immediately follows. Is this the colony described in historical records, or is it one phase within a much larger process of movement? The answer is rarely straightforward. Names further complicate the mystery. European explorers often recorded indigenous place names according to their own pronunciation and spelling. Different expeditions sometimes describe the same location using entirely different names. Conversely, the same name occasionally referred to different places across time. Language itself became another layer of uncertainty. Modern historians must compare maps, journals, missionary correspondence, and archaeological evidence while accounting for changing terminology. A single spelling variation may represent either a simple writing difference or an entirely different settlement. Determining which possibility is correct requires careful analysis rather than assumption. The coastal environment adds another dimension to the puzzle. Barrier islands are among the most dynamic landscapes on Earth. Wind, tides, and storms constantly reshape shorelines. Over centuries, channels migrate, marshes expand, sand accumulates in new locations. Entire stretches of coastline evolve. A building standing safely inland during the 17th century might today lie beneath marsh sediments or offshore waters. Likewise, areas that now appear dry may once have formed part of active waterways. Researchers studying the Guale coast therefore investigate not only archaeology but environmental history. Understanding ancient shorelines becomes just as important as studying artifacts. Without reconstructing the historical landscape, even accurately excavated discoveries risk being misunderstood. Technology has greatly improved this work. Satellite imagery reveals patterns difficult to recognize from ground level. Geographic information systems allow researchers to compare historical maps with modern terrain. Soil analysis identifies former coastlines. Remote sensing detects buried structures hidden beneath vegetation or sediment. Each technological advance reveals another layer of information. Yet technology also reinforces an important lesson. The coastline itself has always been moving. That constant change explains why seemingly contradictory historical records can sometimes all be correct. A settlement documented in one location may genuinely have existed there. Years later, the same community may have occupied another nearby site while retaining its original identity. To people living there, relocation may have seemed practical rather than extraordinary. To historians centuries later, however, the movement creates the appearance of disappearance. Mission settlements illustrate this complexity particularly well. Religious missions often served not only spiritual purposes, but also educational, agricultural, and administrative roles. Their success depended upon relationships with surrounding communities. When populations shifted, missions sometimes shifted as well. Buildings could be rebuilt, communities reorganized, new locations adopted familiar names. The continuity lay with the people rather than the physical structures. This distinction is essential. Modern observers often associate history with monuments made of stone. Many early colonial communities, however, relied heavily upon wood and other natural materials. These structures deteriorated rapidly once abandoned. Without continuous occupation or maintenance, forests gradually reclaimed former settlements. Within generations, visible traces largely disappeared. Only archaeology could reveal what once stood there. Even then, preservation varied enormously. Wood decayed, metal corroded, organic materials disappeared. Researchers frequently reconstruct entire communities, from subtle clues invisible to casual observation. A row of post holes may indicate a building. Discarded shells reveal dietary habits. Charcoal layers suggest cooking areas. Small fragments gradually become larger stories. Another reason the hidden colony mystery persists involves historical priorities. Early colonial administrators focused on governance, diplomacy, and resource management. They rarely anticipated that future historians would attempt to locate every settlement with archaeological precision. Maps emphasized practical navigation rather than exact measurement. Distances were estimated. Landmarks changed. Coordinates remained approximate. Consequently, modern researchers often compare multiple historical sources that disagree in significant ways. Rather than indicating error, these differences frequently reflect the realities of early mapping. Cartographers worked with limited information gathered from travelers navigating unfamiliar terrain. Precision improved gradually over time. The hidden colony therefore exists partly because historical documentation reflects a changing understanding of geography. Modern scholarship increasingly embraces interdisciplinary research to address these challenges. Historians examine archival documents. Archaeologists excavate settlement sites. Environmental scientists reconstruct historical ecosystems. Linguists study place names. Anthropologists investigate cultural continuity. Together, these perspectives create a richer picture than any single discipline could achieve alone. Instead of searching for one dramatic discovery that resolves every question, researchers assemble countless smaller pieces. Each contributes to understanding how communities actually lived. Perhaps the greatest lesson offered by the Guale Coast concerns the meaning of permanence. History often encourages us to think in fixed locations. Ancient cities, medieval castles, fortified towns, yet many successful societies depended upon flexibility rather than permanence. Movement was not necessarily evidence of failure. It could represent resilience. Communities relocated because circumstances changed. Environmental conditions shifted. Trade routes evolved. Relationships developed. Adapting allowed people to thrive. Ironically, that very adaptability makes their history harder to reconstruct today. The hidden colony remains elusive not because it vanished mysteriously overnight, but because it refused to remain still. Its story unfolded across rivers, islands, forests, and tidal marshes rather than within a single enclosed settlement. The evidence survives. It is simply distributed across an entire landscape. Today, visitors exploring Georgia's coastal marshes often encounter a place of remarkable beauty and quiet. Tall grasses sway with the tides. Birds follow ancient migration routes. Rivers continue flowing toward the Atlantic, just as they did centuries ago. Beneath this peaceful environment lies an intricate record of human adaptation stretching across generations. Every archaeological discovery adds another chapter. Every newly interpreted document refines the story, yet the mystery remains compelling because it challenges one of our deepest historical assumptions, that communities must remain fixed to endure. The people of the Guale Coast left behind a different lesson. Sometimes a society survives precisely because it knows when to move. And sometimes, the greatest historical mystery is not a vanished city or a buried treasure, but the realization that an entire community remained visible all along, just never in the same place for very long. The lost settlers of Santa Maria de la Antigua del Darien. When people imagine a lost colony, they often picture a dramatic ending. A settlement disappears overnight. A city is swallowed by the landscape. An expedition simply vanishes, leaving behind only speculation. But history is not always shaped by sudden events. Sometimes a settlement fades so gradually that no single moment marks its end. Buildings are abandoned one by one. Families move elsewhere in search of better opportunities. Roads become overgrown. Rivers alter their course. Within a few generations, a once important community survives only in scattered records and fragments buried beneath the earth. The story of Santa Maria de la Antigua del Dariens belongs to this quieter kind of mystery. It was once one of Spain's most ambitious settlements in the Americas. At its height, it represented authority, expansion, and optimism. Yet, within a relatively short period, it lost its identity so completely that historians spent centuries trying to understand how such an important place could almost disappear from memory. Its mystery is not defined by a single unanswered question. Instead, it asks something far broader. How can an entire community slowly dissolve until history itself struggles to remember where it truly belonged? The story begins in the early 16th century, during an era when European exploration was rapidly transforming maps of the Atlantic world. Spanish expeditions had already established footholds throughout the Caribbean. Attention increasingly turned toward the mainland, where explorers reported fertile lands, navigable rivers, and opportunities for trade and settlement. The region known today as Panama became especially significant. Its position connected two vast oceans through a relatively narrow strip of land. Although no canal existed, travelers quickly realized the enormous strategic value of controlling routes across the isthmus. Santa Maria de la Antigua del Darien emerged from this realization. Established in the early 1500s, the settlement became one of the earliest enduring Spanish towns on the American mainland. Unlike temporary expedition camps, this community was intended to serve as an administrative center. Government officials arrived. Religious institutions were established. Agricultural activities began. Trade networks gradually expanded. For a time, the colony appeared to have a promising future. Historical records describe a community that attracted settlers hoping to build new lives far from Europe. Craftsmen, laborers, merchants, administrators, and clergy all contributed to the settlement's development. The colony represented more than a collection of buildings. It symbolized permanence. Or at least, that was the intention. Yet, from the very beginning, the environment posed challenges unlike anything many settlers had previously experienced. The Darien region is one of extraordinary natural diversity. Dense tropical forests cover much of the landscape. Powerful rivers carve pathways through thick vegetation. Heavy rainfall transforms trails into muddy passages. Humidity influences everything from agriculture to construction. Even today, moving through the region requires careful planning and respect for its environment. For 16th century settlers, these conditions demanded constant adaptation. Wooden buildings deteriorated quickly under tropical moisture. Stored supplies required careful protection. Transportation depended heavily upon rivers whose seasonal behavior could change dramatically. Agricultural success varied according to weather patterns unfamiliar to newcomers. None of these challenges alone made settlement impossible. Indigenous communities had successfully lived throughout the region for generations. The difficulty lay in adapting imported European systems to an environment governed by entirely different rhythms. Everyday life required flexibility. Gradually, another factor emerged: logistics. Maintaining communication with distant colonial authorities demanded long sea voyages, followed by overland travel across difficult terrain. Ships carried supplies, officials, correspondence, and news. Any disruption affected the settlement. A delayed voyage meant postponed deliveries. Missing equipment slowed construction. Administrative decisions sometimes took months to arrive. Distance magnified every problem. Modern readers accustomed to instant communication sometimes underestimate the significance of these delays. For the people living in Santa Maria, uncertainty became part of daily existence. When help was needed, there was no guarantee of immediate assistance. When questions arose, answers might not arrive for months. Communities learned to solve problems independently whenever possible. Still, even successful adaptation had limits. Historical evidence suggests that priorities within Spain's growing colonial network began to change. As exploration continued, new locations attracted increasing attention. Different regions offered fresh opportunities. Alternative settlements appeared more strategically positioned. Resources that had once flowed toward Santa Maria gradually found new destinations. This shift did not occur overnight. It unfolded gradually, almost quietly. One investment redirected here, another expedition organized there. Administrative attention slowly moved elsewhere. History often emphasizes dramatic turning points. In reality, many important changes occur through accumulation. Santa Maria appears to have experienced precisely this process. No single decision erased the colony. Rather, a series of practical choices gradually reduced its importance. As opportunities developed elsewhere, settlers themselves began relocating. Families sought communities offering stronger economic prospects. Officials accepted appointments in newer administrative centers. Merchants followed emerging trade routes. Population movements slowly transformed the settlement. Unlike legends describing mysterious disappearances, this was migration rather than vanishing. Yet over time, the effect appeared remarkably similar. The community lost momentum. Buildings once filled with activity became quieter. Infrastructure received less maintenance. Public spaces changed. The identity of the settlement itself began to dissolve. This gradual transformation explains why historians describe Santa Maria's disappearance differently from many other colonial mysteries. People did not simply vanish. The settlement's role within a changing colonial world diminished until it ceased functioning as the center it had once been. Nature then completed what history had begun. Tropical environments possess extraordinary power to reclaim abandoned landscapes. Vegetation grows rapidly. Roots disturb foundations. Organic materials decay. Floods redistribute soil. Within surprisingly short periods, traces of former occupation become increasingly difficult to recognize. Stone survives longer than wood, but even durable materials gradually disappear beneath centuries of plant growth and sediment. By the time later generations searched for Santa Maria, the landscape itself had changed dramatically. Finding the settlement required more than reading historical documents. Researchers needed to reconstruct an environment that no longer existed. Archaeology became essential. Excavations revealed evidence hidden beneath layers of tropical soil. Pottery fragments emerged first, then building remains, metal artifacts, animal bones, food preparation areas. Each discovery confirmed that the settlement had once been a thriving community rather than a temporary outpost. Perhaps most importantly, archaeology revealed ordinary life. People cooked meals, repaired tools, constructed homes, raised families, conducted trade. These activities rarely dominate historical narratives, yet they define how communities actually function. The recovered artifacts remind us that history unfolds through countless ordinary days, rather than only extraordinary events. Environmental research has also reshaped understanding of the colony. Scientists studying ancient landscapes examine pollen preserved in sediments, soil composition, river behavior, and vegetation patterns. These investigations reveal how the surrounding environment evolved over centuries. A riverbank used by settlers may no longer exist in its original form. Former agricultural areas may now lie beneath dense forest. Watercourses that once connected communities may have shifted elsewhere. Such changes complicate archaeological investigation. A map drawn 500 years ago cannot simply be placed over a modern satellite image. The land itself is transformed. One particularly fascinating aspect of the mystery involves identity. At what point does a settlement truly disappear? Is it when the last resident leaves, when government records stop mentioning it, when buildings collapse, or when later generations no longer remember where it stood? Santa Maria challenges these definitions. Its physical structures declined gradually. Its population dispersed over time. Its administrative importance faded step by step. No single date captures the moment when the colony truly ended. Instead, disappearance became a process. This perspective has influenced modern historical scholarship. Researchers increasingly recognize that many settlements evolved continuously rather than experiencing abrupt endings. Communities expanded, contracted, relocated, merged, or changed purpose. History often presents neat beginnings and endings because they simplify complicated stories. Reality is usually less orderly. The mystery of Santa Maria reminds us that decline can be every bit as complex as growth. Technology continues contributing new insights. Airborne laser scanning helps identify subtle ground features hidden beneath forest canopies. Digital terrain models reveal ancient landscape patterns invisible from ground level. Geophysical surveys detect buried structures without extensive excavation. Three-dimensional mapping allows archaeologists to visualize settlement layouts with remarkable precision. These methods have transformed research throughout tropical archaeology. Yet even with advanced technology, many questions remain unanswered. No instrument can recover every conversation once spoken there. No excavation can reveal every personal decision that influenced the colony's future. Archaeology provides evidence, history provides context. Together they illuminate much but never everything. Perhaps that incompleteness explains why Santa Maria continues to fascinate historians. Its story feels familiar in unexpected ways. Communities still rise because opportunities exist. They still decline when circumstances change. People continue moving toward places offering greater security, prosperity, or possibility. The forces shaping human settlement today are not entirely different from those influencing colonial societies centuries ago. Ambition, adaptation, opportunity, environment, connection, distance. These themes transcend time. Today, much of the Darien region remains one of the most biologically rich landscapes in the Americas. Towering forests stretch across the horizon. Rivers follow courses carved through countless generations. Wildlife moves through ecosystems that have continually reshaped themselves for centuries. Beneath that vibrant landscape rest the remains of one of the earliest chapters of European settlement on the mainland. The colony has not been entirely lost. Its foundations survive. Its artifacts continue emerging through careful archaeological work. Its history grows clearer with every new discovery. Yet its greatest mystery remains beautifully understated. Santa Maria de la Antigua del Darien did not vanish because of a single dramatic event. It disappeared because history itself kept moving. People followed new roads. Governments shifted their attention. Nature reclaimed abandoned spaces. Memory gradually faded. And in that slow transformation lies one of history's most remarkable lessons. Sometimes the most enduring mysteries are not created by sudden disappearance, but by the quiet passage of time until an entire community becomes little more than scattered clues waiting patiently beneath the forest floor. The lost source of the Beale ciphers. Most historical mysteries begin with a place, an abandoned settlement, a forgotten fortress, a remote island. Investigators search the landscape, hoping that buried foundations or overlooked artifacts will reveal the missing pieces of the story. The mystery of the Beale ciphers is different. Its landscape is not made of stone or earth. It is made of numbers. For more than a century, groups of carefully arranged numerical sequences have challenged historians, cryptographers, mathematicians, and curious readers alike. Thousands of people have examined them. Countless theories have been proposed. Modern computers have tested possibilities that earlier generations could only imagine. Yet one essential question remains unanswered. Where did these mysterious ciphers actually come from? Without a verified origin, every attempt to understand them begins on uncertain ground. The Beale ciphers first entered public attention during the 19th century through a small publication describing an unusual story. According to that account, a man named Thomas J. Beale had entrusted a locked metal container to another individual before departing on a journey. The instructions were simple. The box was not to be opened unless Beale failed to return after a specified period. Years passed. Beale never came back. Eventually, curiosity overcame patience, and the container was opened. Inside were several sheets covered almost entirely with numbers. Not sentences, not symbols, just long columns of carefully organized numerical groups. Alongside them came an explanation that immediately transformed the papers from ordinary documents into one of history's most famous cryptographic puzzles. According to the published story, the numerical pages concealed important information through a coded system. One message supposedly described the nature of hidden valuables. Another identified individuals connected to the mystery. A third reportedly revealed the exact location connected to the entire affair. If true, the ciphers represented much more than an intellectual exercise. They promised answers. The problem was that almost none of those answers could be read. Only one of the three encrypted texts has ever been interpreted with reasonable consistency, using a historical document as its key. The remaining two continue to resist every widely accepted decoding attempt. At first glance, this might seem like a straightforward problem in mathematics. Surely enough time, enough computers, and enough determination should eventually solve any code. History, however, tells a more complicated story. Successful code breaking depends on far more than raw computing power. It depends on understanding how a code was created in the first place. That is precisely where the Beale mystery becomes most intriguing. The published account describing the ciphers presents a compelling narrative, but historians immediately encounter an important challenge. Independent documentation is remarkably limited. No verified collection of contemporary letters confirms the story in detail. No official records establish every claimed event. No unquestioned evidence identifies Thomas J. Beale beyond dispute. In historical research, provenance, the documented history of an object, is essential. Knowing where something originated often proves just as important as understanding its contents. Without secure provenance, every interpretation becomes more cautious. Researchers therefore approach the Beale ciphers from two parallel directions. One group asks, can the codes be solved? Another asks, can the story itself be verified? Neither question has received a universally accepted answer. The uncertainty surrounding the documents has encouraged an extraordinary range of theories. Some researchers believe the ciphers originated from genuine 19th century encrypted correspondence. Others suggest they may have been created as an elaborate intellectual puzzle designed to stimulate curiosity rather than conceal practical information. Still others argue that important pieces of the original context have simply been lost over time, leaving modern investigators with only fragments of a much larger story. Each possibility carries strengths and weaknesses. Each attempts to explain why the documents have remained so resistant to definitive interpretation. What makes the mystery especially fascinating is that the numerical sequences themselves are real. Anyone can study them. Anyone can test new decoding methods. Unlike legends passed down solely through oral tradition, the Beale ciphers provide tangible material for analysis. The puzzle exists. Its meaning remains uncertain. That distinction has attracted generations of code enthusiasts. During the 19th century, solving complex ciphers required patience, careful handwriting, and countless hours of manual comparison. Researchers examined frequency patterns, repeated number groups, possible substitutions, relationships between symbols. Progress came slowly. The 20th century introduced new tools. Mechanical analysis accelerated certain calculations. Later, computers transformed the field entirely. Programs capable of testing enormous numbers of possibilities became available to researchers who hoped modern technology might finally reveal the hidden messages. Yet despite these advances, no broadly accepted solution emerged for the remaining encrypted texts. This outcome surprised many observers. People often assume that technological progress automatically eliminates historical mysteries. Beale ciphers demonstrate otherwise. Computers excel at testing possibilities. They cannot compensate for missing historical context. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle while several of its most important pieces have disappeared. No matter how carefully the remaining pieces are examined, uncertainty persists. The Beale mystery reflects that challenge perfectly. If the original encryption key has been lost, identifying it becomes as difficult as interpreting the message itself. Some historians emphasize another important point. Cryptography never exists in isolation. Codes are products of people. Someone designs them. Someone uses them. Someone chooses which information deserves protection. Understanding those human decisions often proves as important as understanding the mathematics involved. Whoever created the Beale ciphers selected a method they believed would protect information from unauthorized readers. That choice reflects intention. Yet because the creator's identity remains uncertain, researchers lack valuable clues that often simplify historical cryptanalysis. The mystery therefore extends beyond numbers. It becomes a study of historical context. Who possessed the necessary knowledge? What references would they naturally have used? What written materials were available during that period? How common were similar encryption techniques? Each question narrows possibilities without producing complete certainty. Language presents another challenge. Historical documents frequently contain variations in spelling, punctuation, and terminology that differ from modern conventions. Even slight differences can influence cryptographic interpretation. A single misplaced assumption about vocabulary may redirect an entire investigation toward an incorrect conclusion. Researchers therefore combine expertise from multiple disciplines. Historians evaluate documentary evidence. Cryptographers analyze encryption methods. Linguists study language patterns. Mathematicians test statistical probabilities. Each discipline contributes a different perspective. Together, they create a more balanced understanding than any individual approach could provide. One reason the Beale ciphers continue attracting attention is their remarkable balance between accessibility and complexity. Anyone can view the numerical pages. The mystery welcomes newcomers. At the same time, sustained investigation quickly reveals unexpected layers of difficulty. Simple solutions rarely withstand careful scrutiny. This combination encourages continual re-examination. Fresh ideas emerge. Old assumptions are reconsidered. The puzzle remains active rather than static. The publication that introduced the ciphers also plays an important role in the mystery. Because the documents became widely known through a printed account rather than official archival discovery, historians devote considerable attention to evaluating that publication itself. When was it produced? Who prepared it? What sources were available to its author? Were any details added, omitted, or misunderstood during publication? These questions illustrate a fundamental principle of historical research. Documents are not merely containers of information. They are historical artifacts with histories of their own. Understanding how a document reached the present often shapes how confidently it can be interpreted. Modern digital analysis has introduced additional possibilities. High-resolution imaging reveals subtle characteristics of historical printing. Statistical software compares numerical distributions. Databases allow researchers to examine thousands of potential reference texts efficiently. Machine-assisted analysis accelerates work that once required years of manual effort. Yet despite these impressive capabilities, the central mystery remains remarkably resilient. No verified source has emerged that conclusively explains the origin of every cipher. No universally accepted historical record has confirmed the complete narrative associated with the documents. Sometimes technological progress narrows possibilities without eliminating uncertainty. The Beale ciphers represent precisely that situation. Interestingly, the greatest mystery today may not concern what the encrypted messages contain. It may concern why they were preserved at all. If the documents genuinely protected important information, someone considered them valuable enough to safeguard. If they represented an intellectual exercise, someone believed the challenge deserved preservation. Either explanation reflects deliberate human choice. Nothing about the documents appears accidental. Their survival invites investigation. Their uncertainty encourages humility. Responsible historians distinguish carefully between documented evidence and attractive speculation. The Beale story illustrates why this distinction matters. An engaging narrative can inspire research, but conclusions ultimately depend upon verifiable evidence. Without that discipline, historical mysteries risk becoming detached from history itself. The enduring appeal of the ciphers lies not in dramatic claims, but in the remarkable persistence of unanswered questions. For more than 100 years, people from different backgrounds have approached the same numerical pages with fresh ideas. Some sought historical understanding, others pursued mathematical satisfaction. Still others simply enjoyed the challenge of confronting a puzzle that refused to yield easily. Each generation brought new methods. Each left the mystery slightly better understood, though never completely resolved. Perhaps that is the Beale ciphers' greatest contribution to history. They remind us that knowledge often advances through careful questioning rather than immediate certainty. Every unsuccessful decoding attempt still teaches something. Every historical investigation refines the available evidence. Every technological innovation improves future research, even when definitive answers remain beyond reach. Whether the remaining ciphers will one day be convincingly interpreted is impossible to predict. A forgotten document may yet emerge from an overlooked archive. A newly recognized historical connection may reshape existing assumptions. Or the mystery may continue challenging future generations, just as it has challenged those before them. Until then, the Beale ciphers remain one of history's most unusual enigmas, not because they are hidden, but because they have been visible all along, waiting for someone to discover the key that transforms columns of silent numbers into a story that has remained locked away for generations. The early Oak Island mystery. Some mysteries begin with an extraordinary discovery. Others begin with an ordinary observation that slowly grows into something far more complicated. The story of Oak Island belongs to the second kind. For more than 2 centuries, a small island off the Atlantic coast of present-day Nova Scotia has inspired curiosity unlike almost any other archaeological mystery. Generations of searchers have returned to the same stretch of land, convinced that something significant once lay beneath its surface. They have dug shafts, examined old records, surveyed the landscape, and introduced increasingly sophisticated technology in the hope of finding a definitive answer. Yet despite countless investigations, the island continues to guard its history with remarkable determination. What makes the early Oak Island mystery so compelling is not simply the possibility that something was hidden there. It is the extraordinary pattern of repeated investigation. Again and again, people arrived believing they were close to solving the puzzle. Again and again, the evidence encouraged further exploration while withholding final certainty. That unusual cycle has transformed a small island into one of history's longest-running archaeological questions. The earliest accounts describe a simple beginning. In the closing years of the 18th century, local residents noticed an unusual depression in the ground beneath a large tree. Nearby features appeared different from the surrounding landscape, encouraging speculation that earlier visitors might have altered the site intentionally. At first, the curiosity was modest. A few people decided to investigate. Their initial excavation seemed ordinary enough, but as they dug deeper, they reportedly encountered signs suggesting that someone had worked there before them. Whether those early observations have been perfectly preserved in historical memory remains difficult to determine. Many of the first descriptions were recorded years after the events themselves, and like many stories passed through generations, details may have evolved over time. Even so, one important fact stands out. Interest in the site grew remarkably quickly. The possibility that earlier visitors had intentionally created a deep underground structure captured imaginations almost immediately. As word spread, curiosity expanded beyond the local community. What had begun as a small excavation gradually became an organized search. That transition marked the beginning of Oak Island's enduring mystery. Unlike many historical investigations, which conclude after a single excavation, Oak Island inspired repeated efforts across decades. Each new generation inherited not only the physical site, but also the unanswered questions left behind by earlier explorers. This continuity is one of the island's defining characteristics. Every investigation built upon previous assumptions. Every excavation created new evidence while also introducing new uncertainties. In many ways, the mystery evolved alongside the search itself. One reason for this persistent interest lies in the nature of underground archaeology. Excavating beneath the surface is inherently difficult. Natural processes constantly reshape buried environments. Groundwater moves through soil. Wood decays. Sediment shifts. Earlier excavations alter the landscape in ways that later investigators must carefully interpret. By the time modern researchers arrive, they are not simply studying the original site. They are also studying the work of everyone who searched before them. This creates an unusual archaeological challenge. Imagine reading a manuscript that has been edited repeatedly for 200 years. Some pages remain untouched. Others contain additions, corrections, and missing sections. Distinguishing the original text from later changes becomes increasingly complicated. Oak Island presents a remarkably similar problem. Researchers must separate historical features from the traces left by generations of investigators. That distinction is not always obvious. Historical records add another layer of complexity. Early accounts vary in detail. Some describe carefully organized excavations. Others emphasize unexpected obstacles. Still others focus primarily on the excitement surrounding each new discovery. As with many long-standing mysteries, researchers must evaluate these documents critically. Which observations were recorded immediately? Which relied upon memory years later? Which details appear consistently across multiple independent sources? Careful comparison often proves more valuable than dramatic interpretation. Modern historians approach the early Oak Island story with precisely this mindset. Rather than accepting every historical claim at face value, they compare written records, maps, excavation notes, and physical evidence. This method has produced a more balanced understanding of the island's history. It reveals a fascinating combination of documented activity, evolving interpretation, and persistent uncertainty. The landscape itself contributes significantly to the mystery. Oak Island occupies a coastal environment shaped by tides, storms, and centuries of natural change. Water influences nearly every aspect of the island. Seasonal weather reshapes shorelines, groundwater interacts with underground spaces, vegetation gradually conceals abandoned features. These natural processes complicate excavation while also affecting the preservation of archaeological evidence. Researchers studying the island therefore examine geology alongside history. Understanding the ground beneath their feet becomes just as important as interpreting historical documents. Soil composition, rock layers, water movement, each influences what investigators can realistically expect to discover. This interdisciplinary approach reflects the evolution of modern archaeology. The mystery can no longer be approached through excavation alone. Scientific analysis has become equally essential. Over the years, investigators introduced increasingly advanced methods. Surveying equipment improved, detailed mapping documented excavation sites with greater precision. Remote sensing technologies identified hidden subsurface features. Geophysical instruments measured variations beneath the ground without requiring immediate excavation. These techniques transformed how researchers explored the island. Instead of relying solely on digging, they began asking broader questions. How had the landscape changed? Which underground features appeared natural? Which suggested human activity? Where should future investigations focus? Technology expanded possibilities while also encouraging greater caution. Importantly, new discoveries rarely produced simple conclusions. An unusual underground feature might support multiple interpretations. A recovered artifact could indicate human presence without explaining its purpose. Geological formations occasionally resembled constructed features. Conversely, genuine archaeological evidence sometimes appeared deceptively ordinary. This ambiguity has defined Oak Island from the beginning. Every answer seems to generate another question. One fascinating aspect of the island's history involves expectation. People often arrive believing they are searching for one specific explanation. Yet, historical research rarely unfolds so neatly. A site may preserve evidence from different periods. Separate groups of visitors may have altered the landscape centuries apart. Natural processes may obscure or imitate human activity. The longer a location attracts attention, the more complicated its history becomes. Oak Island demonstrates this beautifully. Its mystery is no longer limited to whatever first inspired excavation. The investigations themselves have become part of the archaeological record. This creates a rare historical situation. Researchers are studying both the original site and 2 centuries of human curiosity surrounding it. Every abandoned shaft, every survey marker, every historical map contributes another chapter to the island's evolving story. Archaeology here is as much about understanding investigation as it is about understanding the distant past. Another reason the mystery endures is the careful balance between evidence and restraint. Responsible researchers recognize that unanswered questions do not automatically justify extraordinary conclusions. Instead, each discovery is evaluated within its historical and geological context. Could this feature have formed naturally? Does documentary evidence support this interpretation? Have similar structures been identified elsewhere? Such questions help maintain scientific credibility while preserving genuine curiosity. The early Oak Island mystery therefore serves as an excellent example of disciplined investigation. It reminds us that uncertainty is not failure. Rather, uncertainty often reflects the complexity of the evidence itself. Some historical puzzles resist quick solutions because reality is more intricate than initial appearances suggest. Public fascination has undoubtedly influenced the island's story as well. Few archaeological sites have inspired such sustained popular interest across so many generations. Books, newspaper articles, documentaries, and public discussions have continually renewed attention. Each generation revisits the mystery using the tools and knowledge available at the time. This ongoing engagement has helped preserve historical records that might otherwise have been forgotten. It has also encouraged continued research long after many comparable sites would have faded from public awareness. Yet, despite centuries of investigation, one remarkable fact remains. No single discovery has resolved the central question of why the earliest excavations began in the first place. Perhaps the original observation reflected genuine human activity. Perhaps later interpretations expanded a relatively simple feature into a much larger mystery. perhaps evidence still remains hidden beneath layers of earth shaped by both nature and generations of excavation. At present, historians cannot answer these possibilities with complete certainty. What they can say is that Oak Island represents one of the longest continuous investigations in North American history. Its significance extends beyond any individual artifact or excavation. It demonstrates how curiosity itself can become part of history. Today, the island appears peaceful. Trees sway in the Atlantic breeze. The shoreline rises and falls with the tides just as it has for centuries. To a casual visitor, little suggests that beneath this quiet landscape lies one of the world's most enduring historical investigations. Yet every careful survey, every archaeological study, and every newly examined document continues adding small pieces to a remarkably large puzzle. The early Oak Island mystery reminds us that history is not always defined by spectacular discoveries. Sometimes its greatest power lies in the questions that survive. Questions capable of inspiring generations to return to the same place, examine the same evidence from new perspectives, and remain willing to accept that the most meaningful conclusion may not be certainty itself, but the patient pursuit of understanding. The Princes in the Tower. Bones mystery history usually leaves behind a trail. Kings issue decrees, royal households maintain records, diplomats exchange letters, foreign ambassadors report what they witness. Even when accounts disagree, enough evidence often survives to reconstruct the broad outline of events. But every so often, the historical record simply stops. A name continues to appear in official documents for years, then suddenly disappears. A public figure who once stood at the center of political life is no longer mentioned. Questions replace certainty, and speculation begins filling the empty spaces left behind by missing evidence. Few mysteries illustrate that silence more powerfully than the story of the princes in the tower. For centuries, historians have tried to answer a question that seems deceptively simple. What became of Edward V and his younger brother Richard of Shrewsbury? Despite generations of research, careful scholarship, and renewed scientific interest, no explanation has achieved universal acceptance. The mystery survives because the evidence is both substantial and incomplete at the same time. Enough survives to understand the political circumstances. Not enough survives to explain the brothers' final fate with certainty. The story begins during one of England's most politically complex periods. The 15th century was marked by shifting alliances, disputed claims to the throne, and frequent changes in royal leadership. Power depended not only upon military strength, but also upon legitimacy. Who possessed the strongest legal claim? Who could secure the support of influential nobles? Who could maintain public confidence? These questions shaped the future of the kingdom. When King Edward IV died in 1483, succession appeared relatively straightforward. His eldest son, Edward, was expected to become King Edward V. Although still young, he represented continuity within the royal line. Until he reached adulthood, experienced advisors would help govern the kingdom. At least, that was the expectation. Instead, events unfolded differently. Edward and his younger brother Richard were brought to the Tower of London. Today, the tower is widely recognized as a historic landmark, but during the 15th century it also served as a royal residence, administrative center, fortress, and secure location for important members of the royal family. Living there was not, by itself, extraordinary. Members of royalty had stayed within its walls on numerous occasions. Initially, nothing about the brothers' presence appeared especially unusual. They were expected to remain there during preparations connected to Edward's anticipated coronation. Then something changed. The coronation never took place. Political developments altered the course of events with remarkable speed. Questions surrounding succession emerged. Legal arguments were presented regarding the legitimacy of Edward IV's children. Eventually, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, assumed the throne as King Richard III. Meanwhile, public appearances by the two young princes became increasingly rare. Then they stopped altogether. It is this silence that transformed history into mystery. No official announcement clearly documented their later lives. No verified public appearances confirmed their continued existence. Instead, contemporary observers began noting their absence. Some wondered whether the brothers remained safely within the tower. Others questioned whether they had been moved elsewhere, Rumors circulated quickly, but rumors alone do not constitute historical evidence. For historians, distinguishing between contemporary observation and later interpretation remains essential. Many of the written accounts associated with the mystery were produced under changing political circumstances. Different authors served different rulers. Different governments promoted different narratives. Understanding these contexts helps explain why surviving sources sometimes disagree. Rather than presenting one clear story, the historical record resembles a collection of overlapping perspectives. Each contributes valuable information. None resolves every uncertainty. One of the most intriguing aspects of the mystery concerns the nature of medieval documentation itself. Modern governments generate enormous quantities of records, birth certificates, travel documents, official databases, digital communication. In contrast, 15th century record-keeping depended upon handwritten documents preserved under conditions that varied greatly over time. Some records disappeared through accidental loss. Others deteriorated naturally. Some were never created in the first place. The absence of evidence, therefore, cannot automatically be interpreted as evidence of any specific event. This distinction is one of the guiding principles of responsible historical research. As decades passed, the mystery became deeply woven into English historical tradition. Writers, chroniclers, and later historians revisited the disappearance repeatedly. Each generation examined surviving documents while adding new interpretations shaped by the knowledge and assumptions of its own time. Some accounts emphasized political rivalry, others focused on legal succession. Still others explored questions of royal responsibility. These differing approaches illustrate how historical mysteries evolve. The evidence remains largely the same. Interpretation changes. One development dramatically renewed public interest centuries later. In the 17th century, workers carrying out construction within the Tower of London reportedly discovered the skeletal remains of 2 children beneath a staircase. The location immediately attracted attention. Could these be the missing princes? The possibility seemed compelling. The remains were carefully preserved, and over time, many came to associate them with Edward and Richard. Yet an important question remained unanswered. Could that identification actually be proven? The answer was far less straightforward than many hoped. Historical context suggested one possibility. Scientific certainty required another. At the time of the discovery, archaeology had not yet developed into the systematic discipline recognized today. Methods for documenting finds were limited compared with modern standards. Precise excavation records, careful stratigraphic analysis, and advanced forensic techniques were unavailable. Consequently, valuable contextual information that modern researchers would consider essential was never fully recorded. Centuries later, scientific examination offered additional insights. Researchers attempted to study the remains using the best methods available during their respective periods. Age estimates, anatomical observations, and historical comparisons all contributed useful information, yet none produced a conclusion accepted by every specialist. The remains could be consistent with the princes. Consistency, however, is not the same as definitive identification. Modern science raises new possibilities. Advances in genetics have transformed historical investigation in recent decades. Ancient DNA has helped identify long-lost individuals, reconstruct family relationships, and clarify historical questions once thought impossible to answer. Naturally, many people wonder whether similar techniques might eventually resolve the princes in the Tower mystery. The answer depends upon numerous practical, scientific, and historical considerations. Preservation conditions matter. Suitable comparative materials required. Research decisions involve careful ethical and institutional review. Scientific capability alone does not automatically guarantee historical certainty. Even if additional evidence became available, historians would still evaluate it alongside written records, archaeological context, and broader historical understanding. History rarely depends upon one piece of evidence alone. Instead, conclusions emerge through the careful combination of many independent sources. Another reason the mystery persists involves political complexity. England during the late 15th century experienced rapid changes in leadership. Different rulers had different priorities. Official narratives sometimes reflected contemporary political needs. This does not mean every historical source is unreliable. Rather, it reminds researchers to consider why documents were created, who created them, and for whom they were intended. Context strengthens interpretation. Without context, even authentic documents can be misunderstood. Public fascination with the mystery has remained remarkably consistent for more than 5 centuries. Books, academic studies, historical debates, television documentaries, museum exhibitions. Each generation returns to the same central question, not because historians have ignored the evidence, but because the evidence genuinely allows more than one reasonable interpretation. That distinction separates enduring historical mysteries from simple misunderstandings. The Princes in the Tower mystery survives precisely because responsible scholarship recognizes the limits of certainty. Perhaps future discoveries will change that. Archives occasionally reveal forgotten documents. Scientific methods continue advancing. Historical sites are sometimes re-examined, using technologies unavailable to earlier generations.